An Alpha King could command thousands of wolves, but he could not command back the one person he failed to protect. The grand halls of Blackthorn Castle had never felt so empty. Alexander Reed, the most powerful Alpha King in the Northern Territories, stood alone inside the chamber that once belonged to Emily Carter. The fire still burned softly in the stone fireplace. The books on the wooden shelves remained untouched. A small collection of healing herbs rested near the window, exactly where she had always kept them. Everything was still there. Everything except her. For months, Alexander had ruled a kingdom built on strength, loyalty, and tradition. His name carried respect throughout every werewolf pack under his protection. His decisions shaped the future of thousands. Yet standing inside that quiet room, he finally understood that the greatest failure of his reign was not a battle lost or a decision questioned by his council. It was the person he allowed himself to overlook. Emily had never been the strongest voice in the room. She was an Omega, a title many in the pack treated as a weakness. But Alexander remembered the truth now. She was the one who stayed late helping injured pack members. She was the one who listened when others ignored. She was the one who offered kindness even when she received none in return. And he had watched it happen. He had seen the whispers. He had noticed the cold expressions and the distance others created around her. But he told himself it was not his place to interfere. He believed Emily was stronger than people realized. He believed time would solve what he refused to address. He was wrong. The memory that haunted him most was not a dramatic moment. It was a quiet one. Emily standing in the palace courtyard, holding a small basket of healing plants, looking toward him with an expression he could not understand at the time. It was not anger. It was disappointment. As if she had finally accepted that the one person she hoped would see her was never going to truly look. Alexander closed his eyes and felt the weight of that realization. The title of Alpha King had always meant responsibility. He had protected borders. He had made difficult choices. He had carried the expectations of an entire kingdom. But he had failed the one person who needed his voice. Weeks had passed since Emily disappeared from the castle. At first, Alexander assumed she would return. He thought she only needed time away. But every day without her revealed the truth. Emily had not left to gain attention. She had left because she had stopped believing she mattered. The search for answers had begun, but the kingdom had no trace of where she went. No message. No warning. Only silence. And then came the discovery that changed everything. A secret hidden from the entire pack. A truth that meant Emily had not simply walked away. She had carried away something precious that belonged to the future of the Alpha line. For the first time in his life, Alexander felt powerless. Not because he had lost his crown. Not because his authority had been challenged. But because he finally understood what it meant to lose someone who should have been protected all along. And somewhere beyond the borders of his kingdom, Emily Carter was building a life without him. A life where she no longer waited for the Alpha King to choose her. Before Emily Carter disappeared, there was a time when the entire kingdom believed she would always remain where she was. Quiet, patient, always willing to help. Many saw her as the Omega who existed in the background, someone who supported others but was never meant to stand beside the most powerful Alpha in the kingdom. But they never truly understood Emily. She was not waiting for someone to give her value. She was waiting for someone to recognize the value she already had. Months before she left Blackthorn Castle, Emily lived a life filled with small acts of kindness that most people never noticed. Every morning, she walked through the castle halls carrying baskets of healing plants and supplies. She remembered which elders needed care, which families needed support, and which young wolves needed someone to listen. She never asked for praise. She never expected a reward. Helping others was simply who she was. But kindness did not protect her from judgment. Within the Alpha King's pack, many believed strength was measured only by rank and power. They saw the title of Omega before they saw the person behind it. Their words became colder. Their respect became distant. And slowly, Emily began feeling like a stranger in the place she called home. Alexander Reed noticed more than he admitted. He saw the changes around her. He saw how conversations stopped when she entered a room. He saw how some members of the pack treated her as if she did not belong. But each time he considered stepping forward, Another responsibility pulled him away. The kingdom needed decisions. The council needed his attention. The role of Alpha King demanded everything from him. Alexander convinced himself that Emily could handle it. He convinced himself that staying silent was not the same as allowing harm. But Emily felt every moment of that silence. The hardest part was not the opinions of the pack. She had faced judgment before. The hardest part was realizing that the person with the greatest power to change things chose not to speak. One evening, Emily stood near the palace garden watching the sunset over the mountains. She held a small collection of herbs she had gathered for the healers. Alexander found her there, and for a moment he wanted to ask if she was all right. He wanted to tell her that he noticed. But before he could speak, Emily looked at him with a calm expression that carried more sadness than anger. "Sometimes people do not leave because they stop caring," she said softly. "Sometimes they leave because they finally understand they were the only ones fighting for that care." Alexander remembered those words long after she walked away. At the time, he did not understand that it was a goodbye. He thought there would always be another chance, another conversation, another moment to make things right. But Emily had already begun making a decision that would change both of their lives forever. She started preparing for a future where she no longer depended on the Alpha King's protection. She gathered what she needed, said quiet farewells to the few people who truly valued her, and kept a secret that would soon change the entire kingdom. Because Emily was not leaving to punish Alexander. She was leaving because she had finally chosen herself. And when the Alpha King discovered the truth she carried away with her, he would realize that losing her was not a temporary absence. It was the consequence of a choice he made every single day he remained silent. Emily Carter had spent years believing that patience could solve anything. She believed kindness could soften even the coldest hearts. She believed that if she continued showing others compassion, one day they would finally see her for who she truly was. But there comes a moment when even the strongest heart realizes that being patient does not mean accepting a life without respect. The night Emily left Blackthorn Castle was quiet. There was no announcement, no confrontation, no final attempt to make people understand. She simply gathered the few belongings that mattered most and walked away from the place where she had spent so much of her life trying to belong. The halls that once felt familiar now felt distant. The rooms where she had helped others heal carried memories of moments when she had been ignored. Emily did not leave because she hated the pack. She left because she had finally accepted that she could not keep waiting for someone else to decide that she mattered. Beyond the borders of the kingdom, Emily found a small village surrounded by peaceful forests and open fields. It was not grand like the Alpha King's castle. There were no powerful leaders or royal ceremonies, but there was something she had not felt in a long time. Peace. For the first time, Emily could wake up without wondering what others thought of her. She could walk through the village without feeling like she needed to prove her worth. The people there did not see her as an Omega first. They saw her as Emily, a healer, a neighbor, a person with a heart worth knowing. As the days passed, Emily slowly rebuilt her life. She created a small healing space where she helped travelers and villagers who needed care. She taught others about plants and remedies. She built friendships with people who valued her presence rather than her position. But there was one secret she carried that changed everything. A secret she had protected carefully since leaving the kingdom. Emily was not alone anymore. She had discovered that she was carrying the future of the Alpha line. The heir that Alexander Reed had never known about. The child represented a connection to a past she had tried to leave behind and a future she needed to protect. Yet Emily did not use this secret to gain power. She did not return to demand recognition. She did not seek revenge against those who had hurt her. She only wanted a safe and peaceful life for the future she was building. Meanwhile, inside Blackthorn Castle, Alexander began to understand the emptiness her absence created. The servants noticed it. The council noticed it. Even the members of the pack who once ignored Emily began to notice the difference. The castle felt colder without the person who had always brought warmth into its halls. Alexander searched for answers, but every discovery led him back to the same painful truth. Emily had not disappeared because she wanted attention. She had disappeared because she had reached the point where staying hurt more than leaving. For the first time, the Alpha King questioned the meaning of his own strength. He had spent years believing power meant protecting a kingdom. But now he wondered if true leadership meant protecting the people closest to him. And somewhere far away, Emily was beginning a new chapter of her life, unaware that the man who failed to see her before was finally starting to understand everything he had lost. The first sign that something had changed in Blackthorn Kingdom was not an announcement from the council or a message from another pack. It was the silence that filled the halls where Emily Carter used to walk. Alexander Reed had once believed that a kingdom could continue moving forward as long as its borders were protected and its people followed his commands. But now every corner of the castle reminded him of the one person he had failed to protect. He began asking questions he should have asked months earlier. Who had made Emily feel unwelcome? Why had he allowed others to decide her worth? And why had he mistaken silence for neutrality? The answers were difficult, because they all led back to him. Alexander called the members of his pack together, not as a king demanding obedience, but as a man searching for the truth. He listened as stories came forward about moments he had ignored. Small moments that seemed unimportant at the time but had slowly pushed Emily away. The comments, the dismissive attitudes, the way some members treated her kindness as if it was a weakness. For the first time, Alexander understood that damage was not always created by one dramatic action. Sometimes it was created by countless moments when someone needed support, and no one chose to stand beside them. The pack that once underestimated Emily began realizing what they had lost. They remembered how often she had helped them without expecting anything in return. They remembered the patience she showed even when she received little appreciation. They remembered the person behind the title they had judged. But memories could not bring Emily back. Alexander knew that. He had spent years believing his position as Alpha King gave him the ability to fix any problem. Now he faced the one thing power could not solve. Trust. Trust could not be commanded. Respect could not be demanded. They had to be earned. As the search continued, Alexander received information from distant territories about a healer who matched Emily's description. A woman who had built a quiet life far from the kingdom. A woman who was respected not because of her rank, but because of the kindness she offered others. Alexander knew immediately that it was her. The thought of seeing Emily again brought feelings he had never allowed himself to face. Regret, hope, and fear that she might never forgive him. When Alexander finally learned the truth about the secret Emily carried, the entire meaning of her disappearance changed. She had not simply left the castle behind. She had protected a future that connected them both. The heir of the Alpha line was not a symbol of power. It was a reminder of the responsibility he had failed to understand. Alexander stood alone in the castle that night, looking at the empty space where Emily once prepared healing remedies. He realized something that changed him more than any challenge he had faced as a king. Being an alpha was not about having others follow him. It was about making sure those who trusted him never felt alone. The journey to find Emily was no longer about bringing back what he had lost. It was about becoming someone worthy of the person he had failed to value. And for the first time, Alexander Reed was ready to leave behind the comfort of his crown and face the truth waiting beyond the kingdom walls. Alexander Reed had spent his entire life believing that an alpha king should never show uncertainty. A ruler was expected to have answers. A leader was expected to remain steady when others felt lost. But as he traveled beyond the borders of Blackthorn Kingdom, searching for Emily Carter, he discovered that admitting his mistakes required more strength than giving orders ever had. The journey was unlike anything he had experienced before. He was no longer surrounded by royal advisors, castle walls, or members of the pack waiting for his decisions. For the first time, Alexander walked through unfamiliar villages as a man instead of a king. And with every mile, he learned more about the woman he had failed to understand. The stories he heard about Emily were different from the ones he had known inside his own kingdom. People spoke of a healer who arrived with little more than determination and kindness. They spoke of a woman who helped strangers without asking about their status or background. They spoke of someone who created a place where everyone felt seen. Alexander listened quietly because every story revealed the same truth. Emily had never needed a crown to prove her worth. She had carried her own strength long before anyone recognized it. During his search, Alexander visited the small village where Emily had created her new life. He stood outside the simple healing house she built and saw something that surprised him. She was happy. Not the kind of happiness created by comfort or luxury, but the peaceful happiness of someone who finally belonged. For a moment Alexander hesitated. He realized that finding Emily was not the same as earning the right to return to her life. He could not simply arrive as the Alpha King and expect everything to be forgiven. The person standing inside that home was not the same woman who once waited for him to speak. She was someone who had learned to stand on her own. When Emily finally saw Alexander, there was a quiet moment between them. No anger filled the space. No harsh words were needed. The silence itself carried the weight of everything they had both experienced. Alexander wanted to apologize for every moment he remained quiet. He wanted to explain the responsibilities that distracted him, but he knew explanations could not erase the pain she carried. "I know I should have protected you," he finally said. "Not because you were an Omega, not because you needed saving, but because you deserved to be respected." Emily looked at him with calm eyes. She had imagined this moment many times, but she never expected it to feel so different. The man in front of her was still the Alpha King, but something had changed. His pride was no longer standing between them. His crown no longer mattered as much as his honesty. Yet Emily also knew that trust was not rebuilt through one conversation. It was built through choices made every day. Alexander understood that too. He had not traveled all this way to demand another chance. He had come to prove that he could become someone who deserved one. And as the evening light covered the quiet village, both of them understood that the hardest part of their journey was not finding each other again. It was discovering whether they could build something new from the pieces left behind. For the first time in many years, Alexander Reed woke up without the weight of his crown controlling every decision he made. The quiet village where Emily Carter lived was far from the grand halls of Blackthorn Castle, yet it carried a kind of peace he had never found inside his own palace. Each morning he watched Emily move through her life with confidence and purpose. She cared for the villagers, prepared healing remedies, and offered kindness to everyone around her. She was no longer the Omega who stood silently in the background waiting to be noticed. She was a woman who had discovered her own strength. Alexander admired that more than he expected. He had once believed protecting someone meant standing in front of them and making decisions for them. Emily showed him that true protection began with listening. During the days he spent near her, Alexander did not ask her to return to the kingdom. He did not remind her of his title or the responsibilities she once carried as part of his pack. Instead, he helped where he could and allowed his actions to speak louder than his promises. He repaired old misunderstandings one conversation at a time. He learned about the people Emily had helped and the challenges she had overcome after leaving. Every story reminded him that he had not lost Emily because of one mistake. He had lost her because he failed to notice the many small moments when she needed someone beside her. Meanwhile, Emily struggled with her own emotions. A part of her remembered the disappointment she felt inside Blackthorn Castle. She remembered hoping Alexander would see what was happening around her. She remembered waiting for him to choose compassion over silence. But another part of her noticed the changes in front of her. The Alpha King who arrived at her village was different from the man who had watched her walk away. He was more humble, more patient, more willing to understand. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Alexander and Emily spoke beside the garden she had created. The peaceful field around them was filled with flowers and healing plants, representing the new life she built without anyone's permission. "I know I cannot change the past," Alexander said quietly, "but I can choose what kind of person I become from this moment forward." Emily looked at him and saw something she had not seen before. Not a ruler making a promise, a man accepting responsibility. She did not immediately forgive everything. She knew some wounds needed time, but she also understood that people could grow when they were willing to face the truth. Far away from the kingdom, the secret Emily carried remained protected. The heir of the Alpha line was not a reason for her to return. It was a reminder that their story was more complicated than either of them understood. Alexander finally realized that the future could not be built through power alone. It had to be built through trust, respect, and genuine care. And as the two of them stood together beneath the evening sky, they both understood that finding each other again was only the beginning. The real journey would be learning how to create a bond stronger than the one they had lost. The days that followed were unlike anything Alexander Reed had ever known. As the Alpha King, he had spent years surrounded by decisions, expectations, and the constant responsibility of leading others. But in the quiet village where Emily Carter had built her new life, he discovered a different kind of strength. It was not found in commands or titles. It was found in patience, understanding, and the willingness to listen. Every morning, Alexander watched Emily care for the people around her. She greeted villagers with a warm smile, helped families who needed support, and treated everyone with the same kindness regardless of their position. The more he saw, the more he understood how wrong the pack had been about her. Emily had never been weak. She had simply carried a strength that did not need to announce itself. For years, others had measured power by rank, but Emily proved that compassion could be just as powerful. Back in Blackthorn Kingdom, the changes Alexander made began reaching the pack. He returned messages from his advisors with a different purpose. He no longer wanted reports about status or appearances. He wanted to know how people were truly being treated. He created new expectations within the kingdom, making it clear that respect was not something reserved for those with higher positions. Every member of the pack deserved to be valued. Some questioned his decisions. Others wondered why the Alpha King cared so much about someone who had once been overlooked. But Alexander no longer cared about the opinions that once controlled him. He had spent too long protecting an image of strength while ignoring the person who needed his support most. Emily noticed the changes even from a distance. She heard stories from travelers who visited the village. They spoke of a different Alpha King, one who listened before making decisions, and who understood that leadership required humility. Still, Emily remained cautious. She had forgiven parts of the past, but forgiveness did not erase memories. Trust was something that needed time. One evening, Alexander sat with Emily near the garden where she grew her healing plants. The peaceful moment felt different from the conversations they had shared before. There was no pressure, no expectation, only honesty. "I spent so much time trying to become the perfect alpha," Alexander said. "I forgot that being a good leader starts with being a good person." Emily looked at him quietly. She saw the regret in his eyes, but she also saw something more important. She saw effort. She saw someone who was no longer asking to be forgiven without change. "People can make mistakes," Emily replied softly, "but they have to choose what they do after those mistakes." Alexander understood that her words were not just about him. They were about the future they could create if they both chose honesty over fear. Yet there was still one truth waiting to be revealed to the kingdom. The secret Emily carried could change everything. The heir of the Alpha line was not just a symbol of power. It was a connection between two people whose paths had been separated by misunderstanding. And soon, Alexander would have to face not only the kingdom he ruled, but the people who once allowed Emily to suffer in silence. Because earning Emily's trust was only the first step. The next step was showing the entire pack that the woman they once ignored was the very person who had always understood what true strength meant. The day Alexander Reed returned to Blackthorn Kingdom with a different understanding of leadership was the day the entire pack realized something had changed. The Alpha King who once carried himself with unquestioned authority now carried something far more important: humility. For years, many members of the kingdom believed strength came from position, from influence, and from being the person everyone obeyed. But Alexander had learned a difficult truth. A true leader was not measured by how many people followed him. A true leader was measured by how many people felt protected, respected, and valued under his care. The moment came when Alexander gathered the pack inside the grand hall of Blackthorn Castle, the same hall where decisions had been made without considering the quiet voices in the room. This time, he did not stand above everyone as a distant ruler. He stood among them as someone willing to admit where he had failed. He spoke about Emily Carter. He spoke about the Omega who had spent years helping others while receiving little kindness in return. He did not hide behind his title. He did not blame the pack alone. He accepted his own responsibility. "I thought being silent kept peace," Alexander said. "But silence can also allow people to feel forgotten." The words surprised many because they came from a king who had always appeared impossible to reach. Some members of the pack lowered their eyes, remembering moments when they had judged Emily without truly knowing her. They remembered the healer who offered help even when others gave her reasons to leave. They remembered the person they failed to appreciate. Emily had never asked for recognition. She had never wanted power. She only wanted to be treated with the same respect she gave everyone else. Meanwhile, Emily stood at the edge of a new decision. She knew Alexander was changing, but she also knew that returning to the kingdom meant facing memories she had worked hard to overcome. Her life in the village was peaceful. She had built a place where she belonged. She had created a future based on trust rather than expectations. But the secret she carried could no longer remain hidden forever. The heir of the Alpha line was not simply connected to Alexander's position. It represented a future that needed honesty and care. Emily wanted that future to be different from the past. She did not want a child growing up surrounded by pride and judgment. She wanted a world where kindness mattered more than status. When Alexander finally spoke with her again, he did not ask her to forget what happened. He did not ask her to return because of duty or tradition. Instead, he asked for the chance to continue, proving that he had changed. Emily looked at him and realized something important. The Alpha King who once failed to see her was now finally seeing everything clearly. But the choice was still hers. She had spent so long waiting for someone else to value her, that she had forgotten she already possessed that value within herself. And as the kingdom waited for the future of its Alpha line to be revealed, Emily stood ready to decide not as someone who needed acceptance, but as someone who finally knew her own worth. The morning sun rose over Blackthorn Kingdom, casting golden light across the castle walls that had witnessed so many changes. For years, the kingdom had believed that an Alpha King's greatest strength came from authority, from the ability to make others follow his command. But after everything that had happened, Alexander Reed understood a different truth. A kingdom was not built by power alone. It was built by the trust between those who led and those who believed in them. On that day, Emily Carter returned to Blackthorn Castle not as someone seeking approval, but as someone who already knew her worth. The halls that once made her feel invisible now looked different. Not because the castle had changed, but because she had. She was no longer the Omega who waited for others to recognize her kindness. She was the woman who had built a new life with her own hands, who had discovered her own strength, and who had proven that compassion could create a legacy greater than any title. The entire pack gathered as Alexander stood beside Emily. This time, he did not introduce her because of the secret she carried. He did not present her as someone important because of her connection to the Alpha line. He honored her because of who she was. He spoke of the healer who helped others when no one was watching. He spoke of the woman who remained kind even when kindness was not returned. He spoke of the Omega who showed the kingdom that true strength was never about rank. It was about character. The pack listened quietly. Many remembered the way they had treated Emily before. They remembered judging someone they never truly understood. But Emily did not stand there, seeking revenge or demanding apologies. She simply stood with the confidence of someone who no longer needed others to define her. Alexander looked at her and realized that the greatest gift Emily had given him was not forgiveness. It was the chance to become better. Their journey had not been simple. Trust had been broken. Hearts had been changed. And the past could never be completely erased. But the future could be different. Together they created a new path for the kingdom. One where Omegas were respected, where every voice mattered, and where leadership meant responsibility instead of privilege. The heir of the Alpha line would grow up in a world shaped by understanding rather than judgment. A world where strength and kindness could exist together. As the seasons changed and life returned to Blackthorn Kingdom, the people began telling a different story about their Alpha King, and the Omega who changed him. It was no longer a story about power, status, or the mistakes of the past. It was a story about learning, healing, and the courage to become someone better. Alexander once believed that being an alpha meant standing above everyone else. Emily taught him that true leadership meant standing beside the people who needed him most. And in the end, the greatest transformation was not that an Omega was finally accepted by a kingdom. It was that a kingdom finally learned the value of seeing someone's heart before their title.